My name's Allison Fitzgerald Kojak. I'm a correspondent at National Public Radio, so you may know me from like your car or your alarm clock or something. I'm also the vice president here at the National Press Club. And I just can't tell you how happy it makes me to see a big group of people, club members, club guests, here enjoying our food and our drink in our beautiful spaces. So welcome to all of you, and please come again. So we're here tonight to honor our friend and colleague, Andrea Edney, as she becomes, woo, Andrea! As she becomes the 111th president of the National Press Club. So I'm going to let you eat in a moment, but at this moment, we're going to invite Reverend William Gurney, the pastor at St. Joseph's on the Hill, to say grace. Reverend Gurney.
My congregation usually doesn't applaud for prayers, so thank you very much. Let us pray. God of truth and freedom, we gather tonight to give thanks for the members of the press and for the installation of Andrea Edney as president of the National Press Club. We recall that many people have made many great sacrifices to bring the light of truth to the world. In a special way, we remember those who have been imprisoned or lost their lives in the journalistic profession. Grant them freedom or peace. We give thanks for the food, the family, and the company we enjoy tonight. Bless those who prepared our food and those who bring it to our tables. May this celebration strengthen our resolve to carry out the important tasks you give us. All these things we ask in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Reverend. So we'll have our dinner, so please enjoy a wonderful meal by our chef, Susan Delbert, and after the dinner, we'll begin our formal program. Thanks so much, and welcome again. Thank you again for coming. I hope you enjoyed your meal. We have a number of people here tonight who have dedicated their time and their energy to making this evening and the National Press Club overall a wonderful place to be. So first, I would like to recognize the Press Club Board of Governors. Could you all stand, please? And we also have several of Andrea's predecessors here, former presidents of the Press Club. And I would like to just call their names, and please hold your applause till I've called them all. Clayton Boyce, Gilbert Klein, Larry Littman, Tammy Lytle, Rick Dunham, Jonathan Salant. Please stand when you hear your name. Jerry Zaremski, Teresa Werner, Angela Greiling-Keene, Myron Belkind, John Hughes, Thomas Burr, Jeff Ballou, and the president of the Washington Press Foundation in 1975 and 76, Peggy Simpson. Thank you all for being here. We love our Press Club history. And I'd like to quickly thank a dedicated group of people who made this night possible. Michael Edney, Andrea's husband. Thank you, Michael. Tammy Lytle, again, Tammy. Jan Duplain. Jan, thank you. John Hughes. John, there you are. Michael Kavner, who is the Washington Post cartoonist who drew the picture on the front of your program. I cannot see Michael. And then, of course, there's the club staff, members of the club who took care of us. We have Bill McCarran, Suzanne Striglinsky, Lauren Coker, Susan Delbert, our chef, Joanne Booth, who makes everything work here, Miguel Dominguez, and of course, our wonderful staff of servers. Let's give them all a round of applause. Thank you all. So I'm going to take a moment to talk about Andrea. We all know her for some reason. We're all here, so we're here together for her. And I'm just going to say, one, it takes a special kind of person, as many of you know, to make a career in news. The days are unpredictable, the hours are erratic, and best of all, everybody hates you. And I will say it takes an even specialer kind of person to make a career at Bloomberg News. I see a lot of my Bloomberg colleagues here and here. It's a company where speed matters most of all. Editors have your home number and your cell number, and they aren't afraid to use them. And it's a place where the distinction between weekday and weekend is really just notional. I know because I spent 12 years at Bloomberg News, many of them with Andrea, and she is going on year 19. At least sort of. I'll just say that that fact alone should tell you, you should not underestimate this woman. She's not big, and she is certainly not at all brash, but Andrea is bold. Consider this. When she was 17 years old, an adventurous teenager just out of school, she moved to Prague because she wanted to learn how to speak Czech. She did not come home for 16 years. I'm glad I'm not her mother. I sent my daughter to Spain last year, and I was worried she would turn into another Andrea. She spent those years blazing a trail through Central Europe. She started with her very first news story at the Prague Post about pension reform. All right, so just get that for a moment, pension reform. That was her first news story. And it was clear at that moment that she was perfect for Bloomberg News. So she spent some years there in Prague, and then she headed over to Slovakia. And she pulled off what I'm sure very few American journalists could ever do. She broke market-moving news in Bratislava. Now, I don't know if you've ever spent any time at a business news organization or in the Bloomberg newsroom, but the only news that actually matters is the market-moving news. So Andrea really accomplished something that day. I don't know what she did, but it was fantastic. So she spent the next few years, she made her way from Paris to Boston to Warsaw. She took a sanity break from Bloomberg for many years, a few years. So the 19 may be a bit of an exaggeration, but I thought it sounded good. And then she came back to DC and joined Bloomberg again. And they made her go all in on America. She was consumer editor. And she was in charge of coverage, among other things, of Walmart. So in the years since, she's worked her way through the U.S. economy. She did the industrial team. She did overnight Europe. She did a lot of things. And she led many, many teams and created other ones at Bloomberg. And her most recent journalistic incarnation at the company was, and I'm quoting here because she told me this, social velocity team leader. I have no idea what that means. And if you do, good, I'm very, but I'm sure it's very fancy and it's very modern, and Andrea led it. And so, there's her resume. That's her journalism. We all know she's an impressive journalist, and that resume proves it. But she is so much more than an accomplished journalist. I talked to several of her Bloomberg colleagues who have worked with her more recently than I. And what they say to a person is Andrea cares. She cares. She cares about her reporters. She cares about their stories. She cares about them as a people, and she's not afraid to show it. When she talks to you, it's clear that she cares about you. And when I first met her, other than just walking by her in the newsroom and kind of like shyly waving and saying, hey, it was because she invited me to help judge the student journalism scholarship contest here at the National Press Club. And she's run that competition for many years. So I, like many of you who know her, came into the press club one Saturday morning, walked into a dark windowless conference room with coffee, and there were like loads of people there, and there were piles of paper, and they were all these young journalists like dying to win this scholarship. This was their heart and soul stapled together on piles. And it was chaos. It was utter chaos. It was too much stuff and too many people. And Myron Belkind, a former president who's here, he tells the story about when he did this, and I think I recall it, but I'm not quite sure if I recall it or remember just Myron telling me. Andrea stands on a chair, and she yells across the room, and she's like, you, make a team, you go there, grab this pile, da-da-da. She just shouts her instructions at the crowd, and everyone obeys and goes to work. And you know, you get there around 9, and somehow by lunchtime, these piles of hundreds of entries are winnowed into a few finalists. But beyond that, everyone in the room is moved by the just incredible talent and work that these student journalists put into these. And Andrea ran that for many years, and she really ran a tight ship. She did. She made sure that we thought about who we were doing, what our mission was. But in addition, she was such a champion of these kids, and she still is. One year, she was so happy because an undocumented immigrant student, he couldn't get financial aid because of who he was, and we were able to give him a scholarship that helped him go to college, and she was thrilled by that. So thank you on his behalf. And I remember very vividly last year, we had just this awesome kid from Pennsylvania who started his own website to cover news. He was tenacious. He was from a poor town. He had nothing of his own, and the local newspaper started following his news. And when he won, he wasn't sure he could afford the trip from Pennsylvania down to DC for the ceremony. And it was Andrea who called me and said, can we figure out a way that the press club or somebody can sponsor his travel? And in the end, it was just awesome to just give these kids an opportunity, and that's all because Andrea spent years working on this. So she's a great journalist. She's a wonderful person. She's a lot of things. So I'm not going to finish this intro without mentioning this tiny being, who I believe is upstairs, who's going to, I hope, be an enormous part of Andrea's life, and we all hope the life of the National Press Club for the next year. And her name is Cecilia, and I don't know how many of you met her or have seen photos. But Andrea and Michael welcomed her into the world in November, and if you haven't, it was just days later that we, as a body, the National Press Club, we elected Andrea as our president. And if you look at Cecilia, you'll see that she is just about the most beautiful child you've ever seen. And I would appreciate if nobody in the room, Aaron Cohen, mentioned that I said that to my children. Thank you, because I do have some of my own. But so we elected Andrea anyway, or because of, and we have outfitted the president's office with a lot of baby gear, and we are very excited to have Andrea and Cecilia serve together as the president of the National Press Club with distinction for the next year. So let's give her a hand. And there are a lot of people out there who want to congratulate you and, wish they could be here but could not. One of those was former President George W. Bush. And he intended to send a video tribute and was unable to, but he does send you his best wishes, and he is going to send that tribute in a letter sometime soon. He has been traveling overseas. And then we have, sorry, I'm losing, all right, I've never used a teleprompter before, and it's behind me. So I don't know what I'm supposed to say next. Sorry, friends. But we do have, now I know. Thank you for bearing with me. Well, this man, at least for those of you who worked at Bloomberg or lived in New York, doesn't need any introduction, but we have a nice video message from Michael Bloomberg.
Hello, everyone, and congrats to Andrea on her new role as president. Now, I can't say whether she's a very stable genius, but I do know that as a reporter, an editor, and a team leader, she has long been a star of our newsroom. Bloomberg is strongly committed to defending the free press and supporting high-quality journalism, so we're grateful for all the Press Club does to advance the cause, and we're thrilled that Andrea is the 6th Bloomberg employee to be its president and the 2nd woman. I know that President Andrea Edney will do as terrific a job as president as she does at Bloomberg. Congratulations again, and all the best.
Oh, by the way, sorry, I just dropped my program and realized that there's a beautiful picture of Cecilia on the back, if anyone wants to check it out. I should have known that ahead of time. So now we also have a very special video to share with you all tonight. It shows the inauguration of the first woman president of the National Press Club. Her name is Vivian Hallberg, and she was sworn in 1982. So please take a moment to see this.
Tonight, in its 75th year, the club's first woman president will be sworn in. And because it takes one to know one, we have invited a very special guest to deliver the oath, and we're not saying what kind of an oath, and a very special witness to this landmark ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce the President of the United States and Mrs. Reagan.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome, Helen, and fellow members. It's a real pleasure to pay another visit to this fine old club where so much history has been made. And tonight we're making it again with the inauguration of the first woman president in the National Press Club's long history. After 74 years... After 74 years, it's about time. I'm only the latest of many presidents to visit the club. One of my favorites, Cal Coolidge, dedicated this building. They didn't call him Cal for nothing. I'm sure you all remember how he answered that inquisitive lady who said she had a bet that she could get more than 3 words out of him. He looked at her for a minute and then said, "You lose." Well, tonight, nobody loses. The club begins a new era. That's era, not ERA. Actually, I was second choice for this job. I'm pinch hitting for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who had a previous engagement.
Not true, first choice.
Most of all, do you promise to keep the National Press Club a warm and vital place where writers, reporters, newsmakers, and other questionable types meet to formally and informally exchange views, ideas, and plain good fellowship? to maintain what is finest in its past and work to build its future as a major world news center? If so, please signify by saying, "I do."
I do.
I wish the answers at my press conferences were that simple. But then I guess these questions make more sense than a lot of the questions that I'm asked. All right then, Vivian. As a retired journalist, as a proud member of the National Press Club, and as the chief executive of another Washington concern with deficit problems, I now pronounce you president of the National Press Club. And
Oh, that was fun. I just want everyone to know we no longer have deficit problems. What? At the National Press Club. Sorry, I don't know about that other concern in Washington. Actually, I do. They do. So next, I really want to welcome to the podium His Excellency Hinek Kmonieček, the Ambassador of the Czech Republic. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Let me start on congratulating to you on pronouncing absolutely correctly my unpronounceable name. True professional. And we know it's hard with the Czech names. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's with extreme pleasure and feeling very proud that I am here tonight, because after 111 years, finally there's a president, or soon to be the president of the National Press Club, who is a Czech. We know you are American, but we feel you as a Czech. And we know that it's not every time easy to be a Czech. When in Washington, when I mention that I am a Czech, quite often they tell me, no checks, just cash. So we do value every Czech who knows who he is. And as I talked to your mother sitting next to you and your father, I realized there is something in your family which is not only typically Czech, but which is also typically journalistic. You were predisposed to be very much a journalist because you are just like your mother. It's true that you went for the Czech language course and came back after 16 years. But she was a Czech teacher who came to visit the United States for 6 weeks and stayed 50 years. And of course, there is a warning, watch Cecilia, when the time comes. I am very proud that we graduated from the same university, and you came to the Charles University to study journalism just after the Velvet Revolution, where it was probably the best time. The best for the journalist, because you had to see the new young generation in the free democratic state. But everybody who was older than you went through 50 years of communism, where freedom was not something what we took for granted. And nobody felt it more than the journalists. I don't know if they told you the classical joke of the communist time about the journalists who were explaining that actually there was never any difference between socialist communist Czechoslovakia and democratic Switzerland. That in both countries there was freedom of speech. Just in Switzerland, there was even a freedom after the speech. That was one of the first lessons which Prague can give you. Andrea, you must be a terribly curious person if your curiosity brings you to bring 19-year-old Gerd about the pension reform in the Czech Republic. Was there ever more bizarre subject to be found? I have never met a 19-year-old girl interested in pension reform in the Czech Republic. But I do understand it has a value, because many years later, here we are today, and I can proudly say, as the representative of the President of the Czech Republic to the United States, if you want to make it as a Czech, you might have just two goals. One is to be President of the Czech Republic. It's 100-year-old enterprise. Or you can go higher and to be the president of the National Press Club, which is 11 years older. Andrea, you made it. You made Czechs proud. And I am glad that I represent two presidents. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. That was delightful. Okay, so sorry, I'm still chuckling. So finally, I would like to welcome our featured speaker of the evening, the renowned First Amendment attorney, Floyd Abrams, who has come to defend us all. And so we thank you for being here. Please welcome and come and speak. Thank you.
Don't go too far. It's just going to take a second. Yeah, she skipped me on purpose, I think. I was, until she left the podium, I had been invited up here to the microphone for a limited purpose to introduce our keynote speaker. But my first words really have to be these. I love you, Andrea, and I'm so proud of you, and Cece and I are very lucky to have you in our lives. Thank you. We are very fortunate to have with us tonight as our speaker, Floyd Abrams. Floyd is without question the nation's leading First Amendment lawyer. Since he began practicing law in 1963, Floyd has argued some of the most important press freedom cases in our nation's history, including before the Supreme Court of the United States. High among them is Floyd's work on behalf of the New York Times in the famous Pentagon Papers case. In 1971, Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon consultant, gave 42 volumes of a classified study of the Johnson administration's reasons for going to war in Vietnam to the New York Times. Some thought those papers showed that President Johnson had not been fully candid with the public about the reasons for rushing into Vietnam. The government rushed to court and sought an injunction against their publication, but Floyd and his colleagues pushed back, ultimately convincing the Supreme Court that the government should have an extraordinarily heavy burden of proof before barring the publication of any information by the press. His work against what are now called prior restraints of publication is the reason why the journalists here tonight, do not need to check with the government before running a story, even a very sensitive one. And if you... And you can go to the books and read all about it, but if you're tired of reading, you can go to the movie theaters and watch Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, probably inaccurately, tell what happened. Since then, he has fought for First Amendment freedoms to protect your confidential sources from disclosure, against hair-trigger libel cases when an article turns out to be incorrect, for art museums and billboard companies and even nasty corporations. He has been inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a prestigious honor rarely extended to us working professionals, usually just for prominent academics. Yale University recently established the Floyd Abrams Institute for Freedom of Expression. There is literally no one alive that has led more efforts to protect American press freedom than our speaker here tonight, and we welcome him.
With an introduction like that, I'm glad Michael spoke before I. I have to start by saying that the ambassador's wonderful speech reminded me of and his comparison of life today, the Czech Republic to the bad old days. Reminded me of the story of the East German person in the time when the Stasi controlled everything that was said and reported people and listened to people as they talked to each other and had people spy on each other. And a man in Berlin at that time had a parrot who flew out his window. And he immediately went downstairs to the Stasi representatives in the basement and said, "I want you to understand, I do not share my parrot's political views." So it's a real honor for me to be here tonight to celebrate with you Andrea's ascension. My congratulations to Andrea, Michael, Andrea's parents. Everybody's been so upbeat so far tonight that I don't want to drown you in horror stories. But I can't help but start with one of my favorite lines from a Supreme Court opinion in which actually a book written by Oliver Wendell Holmes before he was on the Supreme Court. And he said, even a dog knows the difference between being kicked and being tripped over. Journalists these days are being kicked a lot, and not just tripped over by our president, among others, but in particular by the president. And it seems to me that your organization serves an enormous function, not just as a forum, which it is, for the widest expression of divergent views, but a sort of home base for a profession that has not before been subject to this sort of daily denigration as to its very existence. I don't mean to suggest, and I wouldn't suggest, that President Trump is the first president who has been critical of the press. John Adams was a great man and a great American, and it was he that is responsible for the Sedition Act of 1798, which made it a crime to speak falsely of the president and of the Congress and of the Supreme Court, just about everything in our government except the vice president, because that was Thomas Jefferson. As for Jefferson himself, he had more than his share of disdain for the press. My favorite remark of his about that was when he wrote a letter to a young man who had written to him. And he said that, Jefferson said he thought newspapers ought to be divided into 4 parts: truths, probabilities, possibilities, and lies. and he said the first part would be very short. But we should remember that but for Thomas Jefferson's insistence on having a Bill of Rights, we very well might not have any protection written in and as part of the Constitution, which in so many words did protect freedom of the press. And it's worth recalling that one of the leading opponents, for reasons which I won't go into, but an opponent of having a Bill of Rights was Alexander Hamilton. So don't rely on musicals too much. I'm glad that Mike referred to this movie, some sort of movie, that has reached New York now. And I thought how many of you have seen The Post? Okay. Well, those of you that haven't ought to see it. It is worth seeing. And I think it's worth just spending a few minutes as to why I think it's worth seeing and why I think there are some limitations on it. First, I think the description and the portrayal of Katharine Graham is absolutely brilliant. And the description of the decision that she had to make about publishing materials in the Pentagon Papers, which the New York Times had and had begun to publish articles about, but which at a time when the Post was going public, when the Times was enjoined, so a district court judge could make a decision as to whether a prior restraint should be entered or not. And Daniel Ellsberg made available to the Post portions of the Pentagon Papers. It had a serious decision to make. I understand the position of the outside counsel, and actually outside counsel advised both the Post and the Times not to publish the Pentagon Papers that they had. In the case of the Post, the problem was that an injunction had been entered against the Times, and it said that the Times couldn't publish while the judge decided the case, and no one acting in concert with the judge, together with the Times, could publish at that same time. And so there was concern on the part of the Post's outside counsel that if there was a relationship between the Times and the Post, which could be said to violate that provision, the Post could be in contempt of court, not just the Times. And of course, journalists would know that the visage of the Times turning over this prized story to the Post is wondrously absurd. But lawyers were right to worry about such things, and Katharine Graham was right to make the decision not to follow her outside counsel's advice. Here's what troubles me about the movie. What you wouldn't know is what the Times did in those 3 months when it had the Pentagon Papers. Secret study, top secret, how the U.S. got into Vietnam, commissioned by Secretary of Defense McNamara, and was made available to them by Daniel Ellsberg, who was one of the authors of it. So the Times had this document, 7,000 pages, what became sort of amusingly now in 21st century, I mean, the largest leak in American history, 7,000 pages. Snowden has at his fingertips millions of pages. So the Times had this. What did they do with that? Well, they had to authenticate it, first of all. And they had to go around and find former Defense Department, former CIA people, former people connected with the war in Vietnam in all its different aspects, to make decisions about what was true in the Pentagon Papers and what wasn't, what was new in the Pentagon Papers and what wasn't, and what the context was that the public should have it presented to them as this newly found document. I should say the Pentagon Papers ended in 1968. We're talking now about 1971, so they were 3 years old by then. But it was a study of how, from the 1940s well into 1968, the U.S. became involved in Vietnam, and what truth-telling, or more often, not truth-telling, there had been to the American public. It's worth recalling that while the government was wrong about a lot in the case, they were right about a few obvious things. There was a war going on. We were involved in the war in Vietnam. There were American soldiers held prisoners of war. At the time, the Times and then the Post had the Pentagon Papers. It was certainly possible that there was material in the papers which could have adversely affected national defense, and it was therefore important, all else aside, to try to be sure not to publish anything which could interfere with national defense. So the Times had 3 months, took 3 months to decide what to publish. The Post took 14 hours. That's what it had before publishing the day after it obtained it. It relied upon the Times, I think properly, albeit dangerously, on authenticity, but obviously couldn't begin to go through the sort of checking process and the like with anyone outside the Post itself to assure that the context in which what they were writing about was fully and fairly and importantly described. So we on the legal side of the Times were very glad that the Post published and published quickly. It allowed the Times' chief counsel, Alexander Bickel, I was his co-counsel, to say in court, the Washington Post is now publishing and has published for 2 days, and I remember the phrase, the republic still stands. And when the Post was enjoined, after its 2 days of publication, Ellsberg gave copies of the Pentagon Papers to other newspapers, and those newspapers also published portions of the papers and articles about the papers. The film, incidentally, was just wrong in crediting the Post with anything to do with what the other papers did. Ellsberg gave to one paper after another, seriatim, to the point that one of the federal judges here in Washington, hearing the appeal of the Washington Post case, asked the government if it wanted the courts to ride herd on a swarm of bees. Maybe the most troubling thing to me about the movie is just that the presence of the Post in the case in real life had almost nothing to do with what happened in the case. The case was in the courts already. We have no reason to think that any judge changed his or her mind about how to rule, his mind in those days, about how to rule in the case, or that anything would have been different if the Post hadn't published, other than allowing the sense to validly be spread that this was just not the Times off on a frolic and detour. This is what journalists would do if they had material of this sort. So for me, watching the movie, I think it's terrific in portraying how the Post made its decision and why the Post became the great newspaper, the great national newspaper that it has become, and that it was not, and that Katharine Graham and Ben Bradley and all of them back then would have said it was not until it started with the Pentagon Papers and then moved on, of course, to Watergate, et cetera. But in terms of the impact on the case itself, not on the Post, I think it was minimal. I couldn't help but think of a story that one of Hollywood's greatest screenwriters, William Goldman, who wrote All the President's Men, and who came up, by the way, with the words, "follow the money." That was not a source. That was not real life. That was a great screenwriter coming up with language about what maybe should have been said in real life. But he told a story about a Broadway actor who had been hired to play a role in Tennessee Williams' great play, A Streetcar Named Desire. In the final scene of that play, you may remember, the central figure, Blanche Dubois, is led off the stage to an insane asylum by a white-coated hospital attendant. The actor who plays the role of the attendant has no lines. He comes on stage, he puts his arm over her arm and takes her off stage. Someone asked the actor who played the role what the streetcar was about. And he said, "It's about a man who takes a woman to a booby hatch." So, I want to turn to something more recent now, before I sit down. I want to turn to a journalistic question. No legal side, except that it's interesting to me. How do you report a story fully and fairly and in the best and highest journalistic traditions about a president who has been, depending on one's view of him and of the language to be used, but who has told a lot of falsehoods? How many people were at the inauguration? How many people watched the State of the Union address? How many Time magazine covers he's been on? How many votes he won by? We could spend a long evening together. But the question I want to pose is not about that. It's about how do you do a story, not an opinion piece, and not a fact-checking piece, but a piece immediately upon the president or someone else of great note who says something that you as a journalist know or believe you know is not true. Last Sunday, I noticed what I thought was a good example of that. The 4-page Nunes report of the Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee sharply criticized the FBI and the Department of Justice for supposedly failing to provide the FISA court with sufficient, or as Representative Nunes would say, accurate information to obtain a warrant to survey Carter Page. The draft, the document, the 4 pages, said nothing at all about whether the president or his campaign had colluded with the Russians or whether there was any obstruction of justice or the like. It just didn't address those issues. Nonetheless, on Saturday, President Trump announced that the Nunes memo had, quote, totally vindicated, unquote, his position that there had been no collusion and no obstruction. How to cover it? The headline in the Washington Post and the New York Times were similar. The Post said, Trump claims GOP memo totally vindicates Trump, end quote, in probe. The Times headline was, Trump says Republican memo proves his innocence on Russia. For the most part, the pieces were similar. The Post quoted the president in full. It quoted people critical of the statements. It queried why he put his name in quotation marks. It identified who wrote the memo. The Times quoted in full from it, set forth views of people both critical and supportive of the president. But the Times did something else. After setting forth the president's claim that the memo proved his innocence, the Times continued as follows, quote, "The memo, while trying to paint the origins of the Russian investigation as tainted, did nothing to clear Mr. Trump of either collusion or obstruction. The memo, in fact, undermined Republican efforts to cast doubt on the roots of the investigation by confirming that the inquiry was already underway when government officials obtained the FISA authorization." I leave it to all of you as journalists to think about which way you would have drafted the piece. I would start with the proposition that as a matter of fact, not just opinion, every word in the Times description was accurate. It was preposterous, nothing less, for the president to have asserted that even the broadest reading of the memo, if credited in full, could lead to the conclusion that he had been cleared or his campaign had been cleared of anything. As I said, this is a journalistic issue, not at all a legal one, but lawyers read too. And my own view is that the Times' more forthright statement in its news article better served and educated the public. On a related issue, I favor the Post's approach. How should a newspaper characterize a provably false statement by anyone, but in this case, by a president? The Times uses the word lie with respect to what it characterizes as, quote, demonstrably false statements, unquote, or, quote, blatant falsehoods. The Post uses words false or misleading statements and aligns them for pages. My understanding of the word lie is that it requires the speaker to know that what he is saying and intend that what he is saying to be false. And I'm rarely sure of whether the president believes he is speaking, even when he speaks falsely, is doing it on purpose. However obvious the falsity, however often the statement may have been revealed as false, however far from the truth he may stray. Do I believe that the false birther accusations against President Obama were believed by President Trump? Not for a moment. But consider the example I cited a moment ago. The president says the Nunes memo totally vindicates him. It's not true. It can't be true because the memo doesn't deal with the issue of collusion or obstruction. But might the president, and maybe I'm being generous about this, believe what he said? I don't know the answer to that, and the New York Times doesn't know the answer to that. And I don't think the word lie fairly fits the description of that, unless the newspaper at issue is prepared to say and mean, he can't mean that. Let me try, before we conclude, the same issue in a little more legalistic terms. Journalists are not, you'll be surprised to hear this, are not without ambition. And I'm sure they sometimes think, how nice, how fulfilling, how delightful it would be to break a great story with great impact and be duly recognized for having done so. You'll be surprised to hear lawyers are like that, too. Lawyers think or dream that way, too. And I do. When President Trump falsely accused President Obama of wiretapping him, a serious crime, I couldn't help but imagine, that maybe President Obama would call me, why not, and ask me to represent him in a libel case against President Trump. I know, Obama's too smart to do that. No, put that aside. Put aside also, there happen to be a lot of privileges that presidents have while they're in office about saying anything that has to do with their role. Just think of it as a libel case for a minute. As I'm sure most of you know, to win a libel case with respect to speech by a prominent public official, the party suing has to prove by clear and convincing evidence that the official who spoke falsely either knew that he or she had spoken falsely or had spoken with what the Supreme Court has referred to as serious doubts about its truth. Not just wrong, not just negligent, not just the word I used earlier, preposterous, but lying. That is, in effect, the Supreme Court's definition of lying. And so I asked myself, as I planned to represent President Obama, did President Trump know what he was saying about the supposed but non-existent wiretapping was false? Has he persuaded himself? Did he think that what he said was true? Does he still believe it, if he ever did? Did he have, again, the Supreme Court words, serious doubts about the truth of what he said? Does he ever have serious doubts about the truth of what he said? These would be the sort of things I would look to as a journalist now, not just as a lawyer, to make the decision about whether to use a word as powerful and deliberately so and brutal as lie. All right. I finished my role as an editor for you, and I conclude with this. These are really dangerous days, difficult days for the country and for its press. And the seemingly endless amount of attacks on the press and its supposed penchant for publishing false, fake news that the president would prefer had not been published, have contributed, as many people have observed, to an ever greater division within the public about basic truths, even about what we mean by truth, what we mean by facts. It seems to me our situation may become significantly more difficult and more dangerous after the release of whatever report Mr. Mueller may produce. And that at this point, presidential conduct, which simply cannot be predicted, may be unthinkable as of a few years ago, but possible now. I mean, who would have predicted just a few years ago that a newly elected American president would harshly denounce the FBI and the Department of Justice and all but ignore the determination of the CIA and other intelligence agencies that the Russians had interfered in an American presidential election? Who would have predicted that now, as we meet, there is a group from the Inter-American Press Association visiting the United States from South America to review the limitations on freedom of press in the United States. Now, let me be clear. The idea that a representative from Venezuela, who is one of them, is here studying freedom of the press in the United States is one which does make me take a deep breath. Press protections do remain strong, stronger in the United States as a matter of law than any place else in the world. The question is whether that will remain so, whether the press will remain vigilant in using and defending its freedoms and that of all Americans. And I wish all of you well in doing just that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abrams. I really appreciate those remarks. It just shows, one, that what we're doing right now in journalism is very hard. I mean, it's hard. The questions as to whether to use certain words are hard. Questions of what to publish are hard. And we think about these things very in great depth all the time. And you know, it's nice to hear somebody who's not a journalist explaining how those decisions are made, because I think a lot of people underestimate the degree to which we actually do spend time deciding these questions. So thank you very much again. And on a lighter note, it's about time for Andrea to take the oath of office, which is a little less formal than the oath for the President of the United States, but still an oath all as well. But you're inevitably going to notice, so I might as well get it out there right now. There's a French horn over here. Andrea is going to take her oath on her French horn. Because journalists are creative people. So it's another quirk of a journalist, but I thought I'd share with you a bit about why she wants to do this, about her horn, and how it fits into her life. So she told me this story recently. The very first time Andrea traveled to Europe, she was only 13 years old. This is before the 17-year-old gone for good trip. She was the youngest member of a youth orchestra that was touring through several countries. She had played the French horn for a few years then and played it for many years after. This horn she bought while she was in Prague in the 1990s, long after that first trip. And she said to me, quote, "It has the sweetest and most mellow sound of any horn I've ever played." So the French horn is what first brought Andrea to Europe. And without having played the French horn, perhaps she never would have gone again. She never would have started being a stringer for Bloomberg. She never would have written that pension reform story. And so she never, without that French horn, this and other French horns, she may have never become a journalist. And so to Andrea, she said to me, the French horn is a symbol of possibility. It is, as she says, the horn is a symbol of good things to come. So I think it's appropriate for her to take her oath on the French horn, and I'd like to invite the Honorable Judge Danny Boggs of the 6th District Court of Appeals to administer the oath up here. Judge Boggs previously served. Come on up. Tell you a little thank you for being here so much. So great for you to be here. Thank you. So Judge Boggs previously served as Deputy Energy Secretary under President Ronald Reagan. He argued many, many cases before the Supreme Court before earning his robes. And he came here all the way from Louisville today to administer the oath to Andrea. So let's welcome him.
Thank you very much. She ignored one other connection, which was that Michael Edney, Andrea's, as you saw, faithful and loving husband, was my law clerk at a crucial time. And of course, through him, I met Andrea, which has also been a great honor, and I appreciate the honor of administering the oath. I'm not sure what the wine there is for. You have to
I don't know. I think
reach.
I should drink it.
I think
after.
you reach over it. Let's
Yeah.
make sure. Let's
Come here. Come hold the horn.
yeah, right. Yes, right. Michael, your husband is entitled to hold the.
I have the mouthpiece right here.
All
Not
right.
gonna play it. Not gonna.
All right, not going to play it, but you will hold it.
Yeah.
All right. Are you prepared to? No, he definitely is not going to play it. All right. Are you now prepared to take the oath? You will
I am.
raise one hand and on the other. All right. If you'll repeat after me, I, Andrea Edney,
I, Andrea Edney,
promise to serve faithfully
promise to serve faithfully
as President of the National Press Club
as President of the National Press Club
and to execute all the duties of the presidency.
and to execute all of the duties of the presidency.
I promise to work vigorously
I promise to work vigorously
to strengthen the National Press Club.
to strengthen the National Press Club.
I will ensure that all policies
I will ensure that all policies
of the Board of Directors are adhered to,
of the Board of Governors are adhered to,
and I pledge to fight vigorously
and I pledge to fight vigorously
on behalf of freedom of information
on behalf of freedom of information
and freedom of the press
and freedom of the press
and for the protection of journalists everywhere.
and for the protection of journalists everywhere.
Congratulations, you are now president.
Ms. Allison. Before I begin my comments, I'm going to bring one other person, the person that who preceded me and who has shown me the ropes here and with whom I've worked over the past several years and most closely this past year as his vice president. May I introduce President ex officio, Jeff Ballou. Jeff, can you please come sit?
That's supposed to be for her, not me. No, you're not done, Andrea. You got to come back up here, because I have a singular duty, and that is to toast you. The rookie ex-president has one duty, and before I get into the formal part of the toast, I just want to say how much of a privilege and honor it was to have you serve this club as you've done for many years, and particularly as this club's vice president. You've given sound counsel, you helped write the blueprint of our administration, and you are going to do some wonderful, wonderful things. And it's going to be your turn to hold the fire hose and be the constitutional firefighter that I had so much fun doing. Breaking in a new U.S. president and getting trolled and other things. So hopefully you'll have more fun than I did. So Madam President, the National Press Club presidency, as you're learning, is an awesome honor, privilege, and responsibility. How your team conducts itself during the ensuing year will signal to all those who both witness your team's actions and follow you as president what you wish to leave behind. You will be many things to many people, but there can only be one president at a time. Ida B. Wells, a famous journalist, an anti-lynching crusader, said, and this will dovetail some of the things that Mr. Abrams talked about, the people must know before they can act, and there is no educator to compare with the press. Former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said of leadership, which is another important aspect of what you're going to be dealing with this year, truly remarkable leadership is not about motivating not just about motivating others to follow. It's about inspiring them to become leaders themselves and setting the stage for even greater opportunities for future generations. Truly remarkable leadership is not just about inspiring others to follow. It is setting the stage saying this again so you can just drive it home for greater opportunities for future generations. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who spoke in this ballroom in 1962, said a year later, the ultimate measure of a man is not where, in this case, the ultimate measure of a woman, is not where she stands in comfort and convenience, but where she stands at times of challenge and controversy, and you'll have plenty of that. Yes, Madam President, you will have many successes, and sometimes you and your team may stumble a bit. But here's a positive note on that. John Maxwell said, fail early, fail often, but always fail forward. The one wish I transmit to you on behalf of the club and all those who have held the chair and the gavel is to govern, and I want to give you something that we're going to leave behind. This is the second year I've done this, so you'll know what this is. You can.
I'm excited.
You're excited. You want to pull the ribbon? Go ahead. Now, this is something that actually both of us, this is unique in this stage. Go ahead.
So I'm one of those folks.
Now, as you remember, last year on that lovely little table,
Yes.
the original George Washington gavel of 1783 laid here,
Yeah.
courtesy of my fellow Freemasons, who believe, of course, in a free press and wise governance. So, on their behalf and my behalf, we're leaving a replica which has both of our initials on it because we were a great team, and we will still be.
That's right.
So this is to actually leave behind in the president's office after you finish a year from now. And it says on here, the National Press Club presidents use wisdom, strength, and beauty to preside. It says JB and AE, us.
I love it. Thank you.
This,
So I don't break
now
the
this, no, don't use it. This gavel block so you don't break the glass.
That's right.
It was handmade by a fellow Freemason out of Illinois. And he was delighted when his name is Terry McCammon, and he loves to carve wood in his shop, in his garage. He says, I get to do what? I said, you get to leave something in the president's office for all time. And he was over the moon. So, as I said, this gavel is for you to govern with wisdom, recognize the strength that comes with this office, and the influence it can yield, and learn to appreciate the beauty of our membership, the profession broadly, and all of those who depend upon us. So I toast you with all best wishes for an amazing year to President Andrea Edney, the 111th President of the National Press Club. Hear, hear. You have some extras to drink up. Get used to it. Congratulations.
Jeff, that was awesome. Thank you. That was fantastic. I'm really excited about the gavel. I mean, sorry, Danny, but I'm so excited to use it. So good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. By now, you probably all know that I'm Andrea Edney. And it is my great honor to serve as the 111th president of the National Press Club. And I'd also like to say, Jeff, thank you so much for that wonderful toast. Thank you. He leaves big shoes to fill. He does. So I'd like to start by saying, first I'd like to thank the Academy. Oh, wait. This is Washington. So when I was getting ready to move here in 2008, I heard that Washington is Hollywood for geeks and wonks. But you would not know this looking at all you beautiful, well-dressed people in this room tonight. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being here to celebrate this with me. I really appreciate it. I would like to thank my amazing colleagues at Bloomberg News. For almost 20 years, they've given me remarkable opportunities. They stand for impartiality, accuracy, integrity. That's right. And I am really so grateful to work with so many terrific people, colleagues and friends, many of whom have brought their great spirit here to the club tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you. I love working with you. I'm also so happy to have my family here coming from across the country. My mother and father, as referenced earlier, are here this evening. Stand up. My mom. So they gave me everything. Most importantly, as many of you know, just they gave me unconditional love. So thank you. I'd also like to say thank you to my brother and sister-in-law, and to everyone from Omaha and the Edney side of the family. I'm so happy to have you here, so happy. I'd also like to say thank you to my husband, Mike, who actually did a whole bunch of organizing for this event. Really, thank you, Mike. Thank you for inviting Mr. Abrams, Judge Boggs. Thank you for all of the coordination. Without your unswerving support and everything, and just your general amazingness, I wouldn't be here tonight. So I love you and thank you. Thank you. As you've already heard, there's a new addition to our family. Her name is Cecilia Jane. She's pretty awesome. Yes, the first baby. Thank you, Tommy. As originally designated by Tommy Burr, former president. So in just 2 short months, she has completely changed our lives. Our lives are filled with joy, filled with joy. So Cecilia wanted me to let you know how much she regrets not being here in this room with us tonight. But she really just couldn't find anything to wear to a black tie event. Mama's gonna have to rectify that. Also, she has a very important appointment tomorrow. She's going to be baptized. Yeah. So she needed her beauty sleep. But you are all going to be seeing her around the club this year, and she looks forward to meeting you. To my fellow board members, thank you. I want everybody to know, these remarkable people are working journalists and communications professionals. They have full-time jobs and pressing deadlines, but they give of their time to make the press club the best that it can be. Their service is extraordinary, and I value their advice, their energy, and their friendship. And together, we lead this remarkable enterprise begun more than a century ago. to uphold the highest standards in journalism. As I prepared to take my place in the long line of presidents, so many of whom have encouraged and supported me, thank you so much. As I prepared to stand with these great leaders, I became very aware of what the Press Club is and does and means to so many people here and around the world. We have a tremendous responsibility, and I want to say thank you to all of you for putting your trust in me to carry forward the good work that we have already done. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists, and that is a lot to live up to. We live up to that responsibility every day by defending the freedom of the press to keep the American people informed of what their government is doing in their name. So just a little while ago, you heard Floyd Abrams, the country's foremost authority on the First Amendment, remind us of the vital role a free and fair press, protected from government interference, plays in our democracy. Thank you, Floyd, for being here tonight. We live up to that responsibility by striving to improve our profession through education and training. Our National Press Club Journalism Institute offers a series of classes and seminars to keep our community of journalists at their sharpest. We live up to the responsibility by recognizing our most talented journalists through our awards program run by Will Lester, who is here somewhere. Thank you, Will. He was coming. We live up to that responsibility by providing a forum for world leaders, high-ranking officials of our own government, captains of industry, and other newsmakers to come and meet the press. These prominent voices come to this room to make news-breaking announcements and to answer your questions. They are ably organized by the headliners team, led by Betsy Fisher-Martin and Lisa Matthews. Please stand. And we also identify the next generation of journalists through our wonderful scholarships program that was my joy and honor to lead starting in 2010. So just during my time with the program, we helped 28 super talented, bright kids go through school. It's cool. It's very cool. And if you haven't judged a scholarship session with me, please come. You will feel so good about yourselves, and your hope for the future of journalism will be renewed when you read through these kids' applications. I'm serious. But anyhow, not all of our activities here at the club are here at the club or even in Washington. In 2015 and 2016, we were leaders in the effort to fight for the release of Washington Post reporter Jason Rezaian from prison in Iran. And the presidents who spearheaded that are here tonight as well. And just way to go. I aspire to follow you guys in your footsteps. So we're really happy that Jason and Yegi are back and his wife Yegi are back in Washington, D.C. And I am happier still to see that Jason is now filing again for the Washington Post. Jason has seen firsthand the perils of a country without a free press. There's another case that I would like to bring to your attention tonight, and that's the case of Emilio Gutierrez, a Mexican journalist who was driven from his country by death threats. Emilio is being detained in El Paso while he awaits appeal of his asylum request. So Emilio stood here on this very stage in October and accepted our John Aubuchon Press Freedom Award on behalf of his fellow journalists in Mexico. Many of you will recall his moving words. 2 months later, he was handcuffed by immigration agents and rushed towards deportation. This country used to be known as the place where journalists and activists could find safe harbor when attacked by their governments or driven from their country. It was a large part of what we stood for. Now we're showing, in this case, something different. Where the words inscribed on the Statue of Liberty say, "Bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," nowhere does it say, "Do not bring me the journalist whose life is at risk." So this is why, in my first act as president, on my first day in office, I held a news conference calling for Emilio's release and asylum. This important work began under the 110th administration of Jeff Ballou, and we're going to continue it. We're not going to rest until Emilio is released and granted asylum. We will continue to highlight and speak out against assaults on press freedom throughout the world, whether they're here in Syria, Egypt, Turkey, Myanmar. We are very fortunate to live in a country where the freedom of the press to report the news is enshrined in our very first amendment to the Constitution. So with that right, that privilege, comes great responsibility. If we ask hard questions of our leaders, no matter their political persuasion, if we assiduously pursue fairness and objectivity, if we follow the facts wherever they lead, the freedom of the press will be strong and enduring. That is our charge, and working together, we will keep it. This club, alongside great champions of the First Amendment, like Floyd Abrams, will not stop. We're going to keep fighting to protect press freedoms in this country and throughout the world, because at the National Press Club, that's just what we do. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Allison, for doing this so awesome job of running this program. Thank you.
Oh, it's awesome. She's awesome. So I don't really have a lot more to say tonight other than we are thrilled and privileged to have Andrea as our president. And now that your dinner is done, we are so happy to have you here. We don't want the party to end, but the dinner is over. So if everyone could please join us in the Holman Lounge. The music is going to continue. There'll be bars, there'll be dancing, there'll be drinks, and we would like to continue celebrating Andrea, the National Press Club, and our First Amendment. So please join us next door. Thank you so much for coming.